next guest is the New York Times bestselling author of the popular James Reece series, including The Terminal List, which is widely regarded as one of the best debut thrillers of all time. A former Navy SEAL who spent 20 years in the military, including time as a SEAL sniper, a junior officer leading assault and sniper teams in Iraq and Afghanistan, a platoon commander practicing counterinsurgency in southern Philippines, to commanding a special operations task unit in the most Iranian-influenced section of southern Iraq. He lived the action long before he started writing it. Jack Carr, welcome to Thriller Talk.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. I always love to talk to both of you. And now I have you both here together at the same time. So this is fantastic. Love talking books and reading and history of the genre and all of that stuff. So I really look forward to this.
Oh, that's good. We have questions about all those things. Let me start with this, though, okay? So Vince Flynn, Brad Thor, Ted Bell, Jack Carr. Your editor, Emily Bessler, has worked with some of the biggest names in our genre. So did you know that before she bought your first book? And what is it like working with such an iconic editor of thrillers?
Yes, so I did know that. And specifically, that's the only person whose desk I wanted to land that manuscript on was Emily Bessler. And of course, for years, I'd seen her name in the back of Vince Flynn's books and Brad Thor's books. So I was very well acquainted, like, who is this? Who is this person? And so I knew that was kind of my, even before I really knew, before I got to that stage, like I was aware of who she was, where I was at that stage where I was writing and then actively planning on finishing a manuscript and getting it to somebody in New York. So when I did get to that stage, I didn't have to do any other research. I didn't have to go to the back of any books and acknowledgments and look and see, connect any dots with names or anything like that. I already knew Emily Bessler. She is the one. She is the only one. And I want this to end up on her desk, and got it there thankfully through Brad Thor, who told me that hey, he'd let her know that it was coming, but he would do no more than that. He was not going to read it, was not going to give me any advice, was not going to do anything. He was just going to let them know that that this book was coming. And he said, I can't guarantee they'll even open the package, cannot guarantee that they'll read one word, definitely cannot guarantee that they will like it, but I can let them know that it's coming. And I was like, that is all I need. Thank you, sir. And so he did that, and it ended up on her desk, and she opened the package, and she read more than just one page, and she read the whole thing and loved it, and wanted to do it. So yeah, super. And working with her is amazing. And I didn't know going in what that would be like, obviously, because all I've seen is the acknowledgement section of all these novels. But I thought, once she gets it, she's going to change a lot. Like she's just going to, do her thing and make this book so way, whatever she needs to do to make it as good as she thinks it can be. And then she came back with like 3 comments when we got to that stage. She was like, hey, what do you think this here? What do you say this here? And then a third thing that I don't even remember. I'd have to go back in emails to look. But they were not anything earth shattering. They were important though, but they were like minor as far as like sentences or content wise, but very important as far as character development, thought process wise, connection with the reader, that type of a thing. But there were very few. It was just those 3 things. And so I was super surprised. I was like, if Emily Bessler wants to put aliens from outer space coming down into this book, you know what's going in? Aliens from outer space are coming down and are going into the terminal list. But that was not the case. It's out there pretty much as it was originally written. But they did take out, I had blurbs or quotes at each section. I had a quote before the prologue, before part 1, before part 2, before part 3, and before the epilogue. And once it got to that stage, I think when they were printing galleys, I think the lawyers came in and said, hey, Johnny Cash estate, we have to reach out to like the Johnny Cash estate to ask them if we can use this. I guess, as an unproven brand new author, they're not willing to spend the amount of money you need to get to do whatever you need to do to use lyrics to an iconic song. And it was for The Man Comes Around. So I found out that he took one stanza from that, from a song from the 1800s, and no one knows who wrote it, or there's nobody, there's no label back then, of course, that sort of thing. So there's a man going around taking names. And so that is what starts the book, sets the tone for the book, and then there's nothing else attached to each one of those chapters. But originally, there was a quote from Man Comes Around before each one of those parts of the novel. So that's a long way of saying it is amazing working with Emily. She's incredible.
Well, it's incredible to me how small tweaks can make all the difference. Just like you said, just a few places that didn't feel correct in characterization, and you can just whip it into shape. So great job. I lived in Africa, Kenya for 3 years, been to Botswana, Zimbabwe, South Africa, I share your complete passion for Africa. I'd like to hear more about your experience in there with the anti-poaching units, why Africa is in your blood, and how it influences your writing.
Yeah, so there's a few parts to this. The first is I went there in high school. Actually, I went to Kenya in high school as part of like a pilot project to help build a library up in northern Kenya. So I went there with a few people from my high school. One of the people in my high school, in my class above me, I think, she was from Africa, from Kenya, from this village. So we put together a group. We raised money, and we went back there, and we helped build this library during the summer in like 89, I think, 1989, I think. That was my first time putting boots on the ground there. My first experience with ants that come back again in Savage Sun. I learned about these crazy ants that just devour things during that trip. And then I've been back. Then I went back a few times over the years. Went to Egypt, went to Morocco, went there in the military to Mali to do some training out there. And then while I was still in the military, I went back to Africa another time, but on a personal trip. And then right after, I just knew that my character, he's leaving from the East Coast at the end of the first book. He's in the Atlantic. And he needs to go somewhere to learn to live again. And okay, what's to the east? Africa. Okay. So, and then I had to go through the whole thing. Okay, what happens? Does it when he hit here? He kind of knows how to sail, but not really. He's kind of learning. He has the basics, but he's figuring it out here as he goes, kind of learning baptism by fire. Where would you go? And I talked to two sailors. Luckily, I know Jimmy Spithill, who's America's Cup skipper. He's a good friend. And then I got put in touch with another person who does these like round the world Volvo race things. So I talked to both of them about sailing. And then of course I'm like, hey, how do you scuttle something? If you wanted to destroy a boat, how would you scuttle it? And they're like, what? So I had to do all that, but and distances and storms and wind, and if you're off course, and if you're this person who doesn't really know what they're doing, so they don't have your skill set, like how much time and distance would that add? So I had to interview all of those guys. But my initial thought was, okay, Reece is going to hit the west coast of Africa. Okay, boom. There's point one. Now, does he get off the boat and go like overlanding across to get where he needs to go, or does he stay there? Okay, no, I think he needs to go over here to Mozambique and go around longer journey, scuttle it. So anyway, I went to Mozambique because I had not been there, and I knew this was a very important part of the story because that's where my character was going to learn to live again, and take his old skills and turn them into something good. And use them for a positive purpose as far as anti-poaching goes. So I went over there, had pages and pages of notes that I wanted to ask, and I did ask those questions. A bunch of language stuff that didn't make it into the book. A couple did, I think, but all because there's so many languages over there, all these different tribal dialects and all these different languages. So I had all these things I wanted to learn how to say in all the different dialects. So I still have those notes of pages, and then I had a bunch of other questions about Chinese mining operations, timber and minerals, and all that. But what I got from it was much more than what I wrote down the answer to those questions. I learned so much just talking to the professional hunters, talking to the trackers, getting those personal stories and things that I just would never have been able to get just by typing in a Google search, or even just by getting those questions answered, like by handing those to somebody else and having them go ask those questions for me and bring them back. So I needed to go, yeah. And there's something about Africa, about birthplace of civilization, and there's just so much to that, as far as almost like a rebirth. So for him to go there to learn to live again was a natural place, and it's a good place to take those skills and do something good with them, and turn these skills that he used for hunting people into hunting poachers and protecting this wildlife. So it just was a natural fit. And then I went back again to do the actual anti-poaching training in South Africa because there was a unit down there that was changing over to Glocks and M4s, and I have some experience with those weapon systems. So I went down there and then got to learn so much from these guys that are getting a little older, because they'd caught the tail end of the Bush Wars. They'd done National Police Force type CSI stuff. Now they're on these units protecting, in this case, some of the last rhino on Earth. So I got a lot from them to weave into both the second and third novels.
I don't know if you noticed, by the way, Jack, I'm drinking out of my.
Hey, nice. I like it. They're coming back soon. So relaunching. Couldn't meet demand, so I had to send it to a fulfillment center. So we're working through relaunching here shortly.
gear is available, officialjackcarr.com,
There
right?
you go. There'll be some link. We're going to take the merch stuff, incorporate it into that site, and then outsource it, because there was just, my wife and I were stuffing envelopes in here, and like it was chaos, boxes everywhere. So yeah, now let's go into a fulfillment
This
center.
is specifically, this is like the Generation 2 mug, by the way.
Oh, I know. Yeah, look at
Yeah,
that.
right.
Nice.
I got
I
the
like
first
it.
one as
Yep,
well, but I
that's
like
right.
this one.
Awesome.
Last year, man, you did the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yes.
Such a great episode. Covers a wide range of topics, from you hunting bears to everything else. Those episodes, like his podcast, obviously it's so popular. They're so long. What is this process like shooting with Joe, and how did you guys first meet?
Yeah. So we first met. I'm involved with a hunting operation in Lanai, Hawaii, out of the Four Seasons. In case anyone's interested in roughing it on a trip like that. And gosh, was that the first time I met Joe over there? It's either I think it was in Lanai. Yeah, I think it was in Lanai. He was out there with his family. So I was out there too. Got to hang out with him, and he's been out there a few times to hunt. So and there with his family, because they can lie by the pool and hang out. He can go hunt, and he's a big bow hunter now. So that was the first time, and then we linked up a couple more times over the years, and then he came out here to Utah for a hunt. We spent some time together out here in the backcountry, and then and all this time I'm like, oh man, it'd be awesome if Joe asked me on that podcast that he has. That would be great, especially even before the first book came out. And then that didn't happen, and then second book didn't happen, and then third book didn't happen. Until after it made the New York Times bestseller list. And so now I'm so thankful that he did not ask me to come on that show beforehand, because I think it's so much more powerful just to know that the book made the New York Times list with this grassroots effort from readers, from veterans, tactical shooters, hunters, all these people that really told a friend, whether it was one person or 10 people or whatever it might be, through all these just natural, authentic, real personal relationships that got developed over time, and for the book resonating with people enough that they wanted to, risk their political capital with a friend to say, hey, you should try this book, or listen to this book, or however they take it in. So now I'm so glad that he didn't ask me on. I'm so glad Tucker didn't ask me on. I've known we have mutual friends, so he didn't ask me on until after. Chris Pratt didn't post until after. So now I'm so thankful to all three of those people that they did not help ahead of time. So that's pretty cool. But anyway, yeah, Joe just texted me and said, hey, I want to come on. So looks like I'm going to do it again here pretty soon. And I was like, yeah, okay, and I'm like, yes.
And is it like one shoot? Like you sit there for like the entire 3-4 hours and just go?
Yeah, you just go. And so this time I've learned my lesson. Now I'm going to line up like 3 coffee cups. I think I drink a little faster than Joe does. So this time I'm going to line them up, because I was done with mine pretty quick as we were going. But yeah, you go in and you go to your undisclosed location and go in there, and we hang out for a little bit. And back then, walked around his place. He had a place you can shoot in there. He's got a bunch of stuff he can work out with. His cars are lined up. We're both into Land Cruisers and that sort of thing. So he has his in there, so we get to check all that out. And then you just sit down and go. Yeah. And you just go until it's over. And then bam, that's it. And usually average about 3 hours. So that was fantastic. And then the audiobooks hit the list, both the third book and the first book, then hit it after that. So that was pretty cool. So I think a lot of podcast listeners are naturally, that's your audiobook listener as well. And I have no data to back that up. That is just what I think. It's more of a natural type of extension of this medium, I think, is the audiobook.
And audiobooks are growing exponentially as well right now. I mean, it's so wonderful to be able to do some other activity, clean your house, walk, run, and listen to a great book. So
yeah, Ray Porter is amazing. I got so lucky to get him. I had no idea that who he was. I had no idea that narrators had their own fan base and people follow narrators from project to project. I had no idea, because I'm a physical book person. But yeah, I chose wisely, and then but not because I was wise, just because I liked his voice. Just listened to a bunch of samples, and I was like, yeah, this is the guy. And I asked Simon and Schuster if they'd ask him, and they said, well, we'll ask him, see what he says. And he said yes. So thank goodness. And then that one was up for Audible Book of the Year in 2018. So we got to go to New York and put on the tuxes and see it up there next to Stephen King and Ruth Ware, and that was wild, and got to know each other out there. And then now we're dear friends. So such a great guy. he actually came on my podcast the other day. So I have this Danger Close podcast that just launched, and we just did a podcast together and got to catch up for an hour or so. And that's the fun thing about podcasts, is you guys know you get to talk to people. It's a professional excuse to catch up with friends.
Yeah.
So that is, I love that. So it's super fun because we're all so busy all the time, especially these days. Everything we're doing, we're all, you're building businesses, you're writing, you're doing all these different things. But if you have something that you can work in there that also allows you to have a conversation with your friends, like it's a win-win. So yeah, that was super fun. I think that's coming out the week the book drops.
I feel that way. If we're gonna talk and hang out, we might as well promote something. Which,
Yeah, exactly.
Devil's Hand, I got my hardcover copy.
Nice. Otherwise, my wife would be like, "Why are you on your phone with your friends for like an hour just
Exactly.
talking about books?"
Yeah.
But now I can be like, "Sweetie, it's a podcast.
Yeah.
Gotta do it." So
It's work now.
that's right.
Yeah.
That helps.
So with respect to the grassroots movement you just mentioned, I want to compliment you. I think you're one of the authors that are the very best at what I call sideways marketing. And that is basically, instead of just going to where all the book readers are, you're reaching out to many different places where people may not be regular readers, but they're very interested in inhabiting Reese's world. So they're therefore going to read the book because of that. What advice, what can you tell us a little bit about that thought process, first of all, of how you struck out to reach out to these people? And then what advice do you have for authors these days trying to get the word out in a unique way, and they're not basically overwhelming all the regular book buyers?
Yeah. So for me, it was very natural. And for authors as a whole, you couldn't share your journey in 1965, 1975, 1985, 1995. Like if I wanted to know if David Morrell had a new book coming out, you know what I had to do? I had to go to the bookstore and I had to look on the shelves and find the M section and be like, okay, nope, those are the ones from before. I already have them. I've already read those. And you didn't know. There was no way. I couldn't Google it and find out like when the next book came. I couldn't go to his website. The most interaction you could hope for would be a book signing. But as a kid, you're not. I just no one came to my hometown. I don't think. Or I didn't even know how to find out if they were coming. Like, how would you even find out a book tour back then? You'd have to find a magazine article, a newspaper article, the book section of the Sunday paper. Then you had to find. That paper had to do some sort of a profile on that author you were interested in, and then you had to see it there. And then they had to put, hey, they're coming to this city with this newspaper covers, and it's this week. Oh, but you already have plans, or you got a soccer practice. But that's a lot of work for a 10-year-old kid, 12-year-old kid, 13-year-old kid, or whatever. I mean, that's a lot to do. Now you can just follow them. You can see it pop up on their Instagram. You can see it pop up on their Twitter. You can check the website now and again. You can do the newsletter. These things weren't available to authors back then. They are now. So for me, it's just looking at a changing landscape like I would on the battlefield, looking for options, looking for opportunities, looking for gaps, looking to capitalize on momentum, like all those things I did downrange in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now I do both as I write on the page, although the stakes are not as high. I can totally mess this up and come back the next day, and it's totally fine. I can fix it, which is fantastic. But the changing landscape as far as publishing and word of mouth marketing and all the rest of it, well, there's some other things that we can do today. So for everyone, they have an option to share their journey, whatever that might be. And all of us have different backgrounds, different experiences, that sort of different relationships. And so for mine, I just wanted to share this journey, and that was kind of how I started. And then all these different relationships with people and gear companies and all that stuff were all natural and all established before, just naturally, because I was a gear guy from my earliest days, and then obviously in the SEAL teams, and that continues today. So just sharing some of that background, sharing like, why did I put a certain tomahawk in the book? I can talk about that. There's reasons behind it, or why did I put this, or why does he wear this watch? People want to know those sorts of things, and I can now share it on these platforms. So it definitely wasn't it was a natural thing. It wasn't like something that I studied and then wrote down and then figured out how to a plan like that. No, it's just very natural, and it all started with, hey, I'm just going to share this journey. Like I'd seen some other companies do in other industries, like sharing it there from the inception, just sharing it and to build up a fan base or excitement for a product, whatever that product is. Well, they're sharing that journey, like how they're building this thing out of their garage. Maybe they have 10 followers, and then the next week they have 100 followers, and then they have 1,000, and they're building, like, I don't know, a motorcycle or whatever it is, this company in their garage, but they're building that excitement because they can share the journey. But 1985, you're building a motorcycle in your garage. No one cares. No one knows. You care. Your wife cares because you're in the garage all the time. But that's it. So it's really about the base of it is sharing the journey, but I think it has to be authentic because everybody today is going that's what resonates. It's an overused term, of course, but there's not really one that's better for it, and people can recognize it. So if all of a sudden you have no background in some of these things, and all of a sudden you're an expert, people can tell. So it's all about being real and authentic and sharing that journey regardless of what it is, right? Because that's what connects to people and makes them care about your story and therefore what you're doing. So I just figured it out kind of as I went along, but I'm still not figuring it out. It's still all about sharing the journey in a way that's positive and productive for everybody involved.
Well, you recently just mentioned your podcast that you started. So I want to ask you about it because it like just dropped, right? So how did that come about, and how can people tune in?
Yep. So I did my first interview at VoucherCon in 2019, and I'd heard all these
Wow.
people talking. Oh, there's no barriers to entry with podcasts; it's so easy. So okay, I was like, okay, this is another medium like we just talked about that wasn't available to authors years ago, but it is available today. It's another way to share that journey. And for me, I thought I could ask these questions all the time, where a one sentence answer is probably not appropriate on these social channels because people can then interpret that however they want, and they can quickly descend into chaos, and anyone can chime in, and it ends up not being productive. People lose the nuance that we have here because I can see your facial expressions, I can see your body language, I can hear the tone in your voice, the intonations. So I decided to start a podcast so I could go into explore some of those questions that people ask, uh, but do it in a way that is much more appropriate to some of these different issues. So I wanted to do it for a while and got the equipment like the day before BoucherCon 2019. It's the same equipment I have set up right here, except now I have some better cameras and some other things set up here that are more pro. But this the little podcaster thing unit is the same one. So the night before BoucherCon, I'm like trying to figure it out. I'm Googling, I'm like looking on YouTube, trying to figure out how to plug things in, like use the cards and how much time I have and all that. So I got to BoucherCon. I did like 6 or 7 different interviews there, and I thought January 1st, like I'm going to drop this thing January 1st of 2020. Well, here we are in March of 2021, and it just dropped last week because, yeah, that barrier to entry for those of us that are not as technically savvy, it's tough. For me, it was tough. So now I have a professional company that all I do is record, and then they take those recordings. We have a whole setup here where they upload and do everything. And so all I do is hit record because from a time management perspective, that's really all I have time for. And then I want it to be as professional as it can possibly be. So it goes to them, and they do their thing, and then it drops. So yeah, it's beyond the books, Danger Close beyond the books with Jack Carr, because that's what people wanted to go beyond those books. They want to know more about the characters, more about what influenced the stories, more about the gear, and just more have these questions answered. So that's why it's called Beyond the Books. So yeah, Danger Close. It's out there every Wednesday. You can sign up on Spotify, on Apple, and YouTube. I think those are the big three.
I like the Beyond the Books. You had me at that. Lost me at Danger Close. I'm not all for the Danger Close thing, but
Yeah, it's more like you're getting too close to the book. Like you can read this, and if you want to get a little danger close, a little closer, then you go to the podcast.
a little closer.
So with the podcast, does that mean that the people that are going to be guests of yours are somehow connected to the book? Is that what it is?
That's a general idea, but everything is connected in some way, shape, or form. So really, it gives me the opportunity to talk to anyone. There's no one that's excluded because everybody influenced or has influenced in some way, shape, or form. So they influenced me or the book, or by default, it just happens. That's just natural transition. It's all of it together. So yeah, it's not specific like here we go, like there's not a direct line in many cases, kind of like the themes of my novels. First one being revenge without constraint. I had that yellow sticky on my computer, and it wasn't necessarily that everything had to be directly tied. The most important part is everything had to be indirectly tied to that theme. So same thing with the podcast. It's all indirectly tied, which gives me the opportunity to talk to anyone. And for whatever reason, I talk to pretty amazing people all the time, like you guys. And so now I can just record them and share them with the audience.
So David Morrell is an iconic author as well as a wise and kind soul. And I think we both benefited greatly, from his kind, advice and sort of leadership in the field. I'd love to hear about how David has changed your life.
Oh my gosh. So it's very early on. So 1985, I find out who he is. And I find out who he is through the movie Rambo. So I think I'm 12, 11 at that time. So I think I'm maybe 11. And yeah, 11. And so I see the movie, and I see it's based on characters created by, and it says First Blood Part Two. I hadn't seen First Blood, so I immediately rented First Blood. I see this David Morrell thing, and then I go to the bookstore with my mom, and I see the novelization of it, which I still have, which is right here. Actually, it's right here. So this was the other one's on the shelf, but this one I was looking at the other day. So there's my original copy right there. It's pretty beat up. But so that's a novelization. So in there, I find out at the beginning, I find out about Jimmy Lyle knives. I find out about there's Zen Buddhism in here. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? This is amazing. It was a fantastic read. And then I'm like, I want to read everything I possibly can by this person. And my next one was Brotherhood of the Rose. So that's the one. And I'm already on this path. I know I'm going to the SEAL teams eventually. That's why I'm focused on that. But then there's this line in Brotherhood of the Rose that talks about the SEAL teams. And I was like, oh my gosh, if the guy that's created Rambo in 1972 with First Blood is saying this about SEALs, I know I'm on the right path. And then that book was just so brilliant. I had such a good time reading all these different novels growing up that I knew that one day after the SEAL teams, I would write thrillers just like the ones I was enjoying. And Brotherhood of the Rose is really, that one that stands out from that time period. Because well, it was so brilliant. That history part that's in there that I love, and I'm just enthralled by anyway. And then it's mention of SEALs, and that it's tied to the person that created Rambo. So, and then I went back and read. I think after that it was First Blood, and then those ones that he wrote, like Totem, and those ones, and then Fraternity of the Stone after that, and then League of Night and Fog came out after that. But I got that right when it came out because I was already on the path and all that. So yeah, he's been an influence before I even before he knew who I was. He was a huge influence in my life, not just on the writing side of the house, but cementing my path into the SEAL teams. And he had no idea, but he knows now. He knows now. What a fantastic, kind individual. Can't say enough great things about him.
Well, let's talk Terminalist TV show, Jack. Chris Pratt is, as everyone knows, starring as James Reece. The great quote from him, by the way, recently on social.
That was nice. Yeah, that was good. Keep those coming, CP.
Yeah, it's a family-friendly podcast, so I can't say the whole quote, but let's just say he says, trust me, James Reece is a rowdy something.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good quote, man.
That's not bad. Yeah.
Not bad at all.
I'll take it.
Any updates on that front? And is it true that you always wanted Chris Pratt, that he was sort of like your dream casting choice?
This is true. Yeah, this is true. As I started writing, a couple things were apparent right when I started writing. So I wrote these 6 or 7 different one-page executive summaries down, and I chose the Terminalist. It was very clear to me that was the one to start with. It was primal, it was visceral, it was hard-hitting. I thought it was the one that was most likely to get noticed by a New York publisher. So there was never any question about which of these ones I should start with. So I did that first, then that one-page executive summary, and then turned that into an outline. And then I started writing. So it wasn't until I started writing that I started thinking of who would be cool to play this. Once this is a New York Times best-selling book, who's going to play it in the film? Because that's what you think after you grow up in the 80s. That's what happens. But at the same time, I didn't realize it was going to be such a personal writing experience. So those are the two things that stand out to me as I started writing. I totally thought it was just going to be a book, a story, and it would be very good. But I didn't realize how personal it was going to be. But from the first sentence, it was personal. And I got to tap into all these different emotions and feelings behind certain things I was involved with downrange and apply those to this fictional narrative. And I didn't think about that. I didn't anticipate that in the outset, even through that process of writing these one-page executive summaries, even going through and writing this outline. It wasn't until I started to actually write and take that outline and turn it into the narrative that I thought, oh, wow, this is going to be a very personal experience. At the same time, I hadn't thought ahead of time of, hey, who's going to play this person when it happens. But very quickly, I started thinking about that as a child of the 80s. And I knew that I didn't want someone who had already done these sorts of things before. I didn't want that the go-to person. Whoever that go-to person was, whenever this thing is published and is out there and it gets optioned and they're making it, whoever that guy is who's like the person that does all these films, that's who I don't want to do this. So I knew that. And I thought, hey, who's that person that needs to do something that is maybe a little uncomfortable for them, that needs to show their range as an actor, needs to do something that's dark and gritty and primal and authentic and real. And I thought Chris Pratt's the guy. He's been Andy on Parks and Rec, and he had a very small part in Zero Dark 30 about the Bin Laden mission. So that's it. That's all I knew of Chris Pratt. But there was something about him that stood out from Zero Dark 30, and I knew he had to be a likable guy. I knew that this character had to be just like Tom Hanks in the 80s, doing all the comedies and then taking that risk with Philadelphia in the early 90s, and then he could do whatever he wanted. I wanted to find that person that is at that stage that's likable. People just intrinsically like them, but needs to do something dark, needs to do something real and authentic, and is at that stage in their career where they're the right age. Like everything kind of lined up in my head. So I just thought of him as I wrote the whole thing. And then now here he is. And also I was like, who's going to direct this? Antoine Fuqua. That's the only person I ever thought about as I was writing as who was going to direct it. So those were the two. And now Antoine, right now, he's directing out there. I'm going to go see him tomorrow. And Chris is out there doing his thing. So I'm going to go out there for the next few days and spend some time with them. And Antoine is incredible. He texted me the night before shooting and before they started shooting 2.5 weeks ago. And just the kindest text. Like I want to frame it. It's so kind and so thoughtful. Just such a great guy. So yeah, they're in the middle of it right now, and they're getting their fight on.
There's two things about this fascinating to me. That when you sat down to think who'd play your badass character, the guy who played Andy Dwyer and the first baseman who can't catch in Moneyball.
Yeah,
that was the guy.
I haven't seen Moneyball. I need to see it.
But the other thing, he has to learn.
I know it now. I've known it for the last few months, but I haven't seen it yet.
But the other thing is, going back to what you said earlier, Emily Bessler was your first and only choice for an editor. You got your only choice for an actor and a director. These are fascinating things. Like, I really need you to want me to win the lottery or something. Because you have incredible luck with this stuff, man.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's I never really looked at it like that, or really thought of it even too much. I just kind of thought, hey, this is ideal. This is what's going to happen. But then I just didn't think about that much more. I put all the effort and bandwidth into the writing, because especially for that first one, there's no other distractions yet. I mean, the distractions of family and life are always there, but there's not the distraction of building a business. And even for the second novel, because I started it before I'd even submitted the first one to Simon and Schuster, to Emily, I was already in Mozambique. I was already writing that second one because I knew about the John Grisham story about writing A Time to Kill first and not being able to give that thing away, and then writing The Firm, and then that takes off. So if he'd stopped, though, I've always thought this: what if he stopped at A Time to Kill? Because what if he got discouraged? And I heard he even threw a bunch of his first editions away or something like that. I don't know if that's true or not, but I heard that through the grapevine. And if he'd stopped then and got discouraged, we wouldn't have The Firm, we wouldn't have the Pelican Brief, we wouldn't have any of these books, and he'd be probably in a law firm right now just wishing that he was an author. But he stuck with it, and he wrote that second book, and then off he goes. So I always had that in my mind. And if the second one of True Believer didn't work, then I was going to reevaluate my life choices. But I was always going to write those two for sure, and then and see what happened.
I think you might have made it a little bit. I think you might be safe now.
Well, I don't think you ever. Well, I don't know if I'll ever think that you made it or not. I mean, it's this full-on sprint every day. People were asking me when the news hit that they were starting to film that. How do you feel? Isn't it an amazing feeling? Like getting all these texts and everything, and I was like, yes, it's an amazing feeling, but hold on, I got this other thing I need to do right now. And so I haven't even had a chance to stop because there's so much going on. It's this full-on sprint because I feel like I'm still in this building phase. And I don't know if you'll ever stop feeling that way or not. I have no idea. But at this point, I still feel like I'm in this full-on sprint. So writing book 5, getting that podcast up and running, the supporting efforts of like the merchandise and the advising on the scripts, and then going out. I think I have a little cameo coming up here pretty soon, which means I need to start working out a little bit. And I thought it was going to be something that I was like in the background, like they're like, oh, just, let's put the author in the background. That'll be fun. That'd be fun for people to like the books. But then they told me the other day, like maybe 5 days ago, they're like, yeah, here's your scene. I'm like, oh, okay. That's like me and Chris. I'm like, oh boy, okay. Hold on, I'm gonna go do some kettlebell swings and do some push-ups and some sit-ups and stop eating all these Fruit Loops. Yeah, for some reason on this one was the Fruit Loop book. Like the other ones, it was Dr. Pepper and pretzels. Love that. But then this one, we're stuck in the house for COVID, and I was like going up and rating the kids Fruit Loops like constantly as I was writing this from the guest room. But you know, maybe each book is going to have its own food group. Who knows?
It was Reese Puffs that got me in lockdown.
Yeah,
That's what it was for me. It was the Reese Puffs.
like it. I like it. Awesome.
So fun. So, Jack, much of your work deals with the dark areas of the military industrial complex. And Eisenhower, of course, warned us all about that in his speech in 1961. How much of the stuff that goes in your book comes from your experiences with this? And how do you work it in a way that's understandable for people who haven't had your expertise?
Right. I mean, a lot of us are familiar with not the full speech, and I encourage everybody to go listen to Eisenhower's full speech. You can find it online. And then there's some supporting speeches out there from late 50s into the early 60s. A couple from JFK that are out there you can find online that talk about similar issues. That are fascinating, especially when you listen to them all together in their entirety. We're all familiar with the military-industrial complex part of that speech, but he doesn't just mention it once. Like it's fascinating. Like read the transcript, listen to it, and it resonated with me anyway. I can't remember when I first heard it. It might have been Oliver Stone's JFK. It's possible. I think I was 18 when that came out, but it's possible I heard it before. I can't remember though. But yeah, I look at these books as, and they're fiction, totally fictional narratives, but there's whispers of truth. That's how I look at it. There's whispers of truth in there, and so most everything is somehow connected. Even the conspiracy about the beta blockers, PTSD beta blockers in the first book that I use as a vehicle to move this story forward. I got those from the church hearings in the 70s. So Frank Church of Idaho held a series of hearings that are now known as the church hearings, where he uncovered a series of abuses by certain elements of the federal government, and a lot of changes were made after those hearings that were supposed to put in place barriers and safeguards so that those things would not happen again. One of them was the testing of drugs on people in mental institutions, hospitals, university students, and people in the military. So there's a whisper of truth there. Is enough time passed where something like that could be possible again? I don't know, but there's a whisper of truth to all of that. So and also, I'm no fan of politicians in uniform. I think that's pretty obvious from all of my novels. When you get these people up there, and maybe they were politicians the whole time, or maybe they became that way because of the system and because they saw what their peers had done after they retired and were on the board of Raytheon or whatever, and saw how much, they show up twice a year for a board meeting and make how much. Oh, okay, I think I'm going to approve this contract here in my last year as a general, that sort of thing. So that part of the military industrial complex exists. It is a real thing. There is no doubt about that. And so people have to resist it. If they're at those high levels, you have to resist that. You can't, the allure of being on the board of one of these bigger companies as you transition out of the military, it's kind of like it's part of your career path essentially, even though it's not in the government anymore. It's still so closely tied to it that it's just ripe for abuse and influence. So these things all exist, and as a person that spent all of my time at the tactical level, I recognize that in some senior leaders, and so that's going to make it into the novel. No doubt about it. That's probably going to be a recurring theme in these books.
Well, you are known to be such a fan of the genre yourself. So before we get into Devil's Hand, what are some of your all-time favorite books, and what's the last great thriller that you read?
Ooh, all right. Brotherhood of the Rose, obviously in there, the whole thing. So they each stand alone. Brotherhood of the Rose, Fraternity of the Stone, League of Night and Fog, they stand alone. And this is what's the genius of it. Like they're all fantastic alone, but when you read them together, they become a trilogy. It's not like, not like mine that you go in order, and now we're fourth and I'm writing the fifth right now. Like you can read each one of those and pull them out individually, but when you read them as a whole in order, then they become a trilogy, not before. Like if you read the second one, if you read True Believer first, and then you're out of order. You can be out of order with that series and have a wonderful reading experience. But when you read them together, then then it's the trilogy. So it's so fascinating. I just love how he did that, and each one is so fantastic. I want to go back and read those books. Well, we talked about this before, and then I wrestle with whether I should go back and read these books that had such an impact on me, because it's been so long since I've read them, and I have these such great memories. These memories really of the magic. And that's what I'm trying to do when I write. I want kids and people that read these books to have that same magic, to love reading and get drawn into these stories. And I had that, and I'm worried that if I go back and read some of these ones that were so impactful to me, I don't worry about it so much with the ones that were really good and I have really good memories of, but it's the ones that were just so fantastic and that I love with all of my heart, that I don't want to go back and through this experience of the last 40 years, or whatever it is since I read them, 35 years since I read them, 30 years since I read them. I don't want any of that magic to be diluted, if that makes sense. So I have a hard time, and plus it's hard to find this time to set aside without all these distractions and read them like I could back then. Like there was, like your Atari 2600 wasn't going to beep at you and tell you there was an update, and then you run in and finish playing Space Invaders. Like that didn't exist. Like you had to physically go in, turn on the TV, flip the switch, put the thing in, turn it on, and then you can only play that for so long. Today, emails beeping, like the text is beeping, direct messages are buzzing. There's so many electronic distractions, but at some point, I think I'll come full circle. I'm not quite there yet, and go back to even the place where I read some of these books for the first time, and read them in that spot. I think under those same trees, and that's kind of my plan. But Brotherhood of the Rose in there, Fraternity of the Stone, League of Night and Fog, of course. Centrifuge, J.C. Pollock, that was a big one for me. Mission MIA, J.C. Pollock, as well. Loved those growing up. So I've just been a fan of Man on Fire, A.J. Quinnell. I found out about that through going down to the video store. Once again, nothing streaming. You have to get on your bike, ride to the video store. You have to look at, just like you would in a bookstore, and covers. Covers are important. And I saw Man on Fire, and I was like, oh, interesting. So there's been two, one with Denzel Washington, and then an earlier one with Scott Glenn. And so I'm like, oh, that's an amazing poster. Look at this guy. It's like it's fire in the background. He's got the pistol out like this. Oh, awesome. So I rented it and found out it was a book, and found out that there was multiple books with Creasy as the protagonist. So I absolutely loved reading that. So and then as we go on, and of course the Nelson DeMille books, I loved all those. I think I found those at Charm School first, and then went back and read the earlier ones, and then just stayed with him over the years. But Charm School, same thing. I read it right around the time that I was reading Brotherhood of the Rose and those books. So that was incredible. And then of course we get into the 90s. Those guys are still writing, and then we hit the late 90s, and then we have Daniel Silva on the scene, and we have Vince Flynn with Term Limits. Although I did not read Vince Flynn until I was going to Afghanistan. So I didn't I read him on the flight in 2003. So I read Term Limits on the way to Afghanistan in 2003. And I think my next one, I think I went out of order because I found Term Limits. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Who's this author? Wow. It was obvious to me that this was someone who was changing the genre and moving, as David Morrell says, moving the genre forward. And I'm like, okay, this is that person. What else has he written? Okay, there's two other books out there, I think, at the time. And I think I grabbed Third Option next, just because of where I was or what I saw. So I just grabbed it next. I think I'm a little hazy if I went in order or if I grabbed Third Option. I think I grabbed Third Option first, and then Transfer of Power, and then went in order from then on. But I was reading Daniel Silva with his first ones when those hit. So I'm a huge fan of his. His first three are fantastic before Gabriel Allon hits the scene, which then of course he's written with Gabriel Allon as his main character for the rest of the time here. But I think he's absolutely fantastic. So I'm just I've always been a fan, always been a reader. My mom was a librarian, so she introduced me to books and a love of reading very early on, for which I thank her every chance I get. Because it's enriched my life beyond belief. So I worry about kids today with all these distractions. It's just harder for them to engage in a novel, just like it is for us as adults. They have that beeping too. They have those direct messages too. They have all those things as well. So it's just tougher, I think, for them to put all that aside and take a breath and enjoy a great book. I try it with my kids, but it's a source of much frustration.
Well, keep trying because, like you said, it's incredible, and there's no better escape than a fabulous novel. And speaking of which, before we let you go, can you give us a bit of a tease for Devil's Hand?
I sure can. I sure can. Yep. So this is like we were talking about this, Ryan, a little while ago. Like it's the longest one, and I didn't realize that it was because I thought it was the same word count as True Believer, and I still think it's the same word count. I think just my author's note and acknowledgments and preface add a little more. I think I need to go and see if I can figure that out. But yeah, Devil's Hand is really something that I had been thinking about during my time in the military, and then as an author as well. It's just as a citizen, really. And that's, hey, what has the enemy learned by watching us on the field of battle for the last 20 years? And I wanted to explore two distinctly different periods when I started. And I started writing this, did the outline on the way to Russia, doing research for Savage Son. So in August of 2019, because I left my computer behind, I left my phone behind, because who knows what people have sent me over the years. And walking through into Russia, who knows what they're going to pull out of my electronic devices. So I left all that behind. All I took was a sat phone, but I had my notebook, and I wrote this outline for what is now the Devil's Hand. But I wanted to explore back then two distinctly different periods, one 1979 to 2001, and then 2001 onward. And what did the enemy learn by watching us in our response to terrorism during the 80s and 90s, really from 79 to 2001? And what did they learn from 2001 onward? And not just the enemy that attacked us on 9/11, but what did Russia learn? What did China learn? What did North Korea learn? What does Iran learn? What have super empowered individuals learned? What have terrorist organizations learned by sitting back, watching us in Iraq, watching us in Afghanistan, essentially watching us play poker while they're have 20 years to look at our cards and see how we do things. So I thought, hey, what if I am the enemy? What if I'm this terrorist organization? What if I'm this super empowered individual? What if I'm this country, this rogue state, perhaps? What would I have learned? What would I have applied to my future battle plans? So that's how it all started. And then I start writing. And I start writing in like January, February timeframe, and I got that outline of where it needed to be. Did a lot of research, and I'm researching infectious diseases because that's the vehicle that moves this plot forward. And I'm researching the weaponization of infectious diseases. I'm reading everything I can. I'm researching online. I'm talking to different doctors here and there, trying to fill in gaps. What one will tell me, the other won't, and vice versa. So then you kind of weave certain things together, maybe like a journalist would, or investigative journalist would, I guess. But then COVID hits, and I'm very hypersensitive because I've been doing all this research into infectious diseases for the past 4 or 5 months. COVID hits, and the book is about what the enemy learns by watching us. So now, real time, I'm thinking as I'm writing, what's the enemy learned by watching our response to COVID-19? And so that starts getting incorporated. I can't get that out of my head because that's what the book's about, how the enemy learns. And then we get to late May, and we get to June, July, and we have this civil unrest in our cities. And what is the enemy learning from that? They're learning something. They're just not watching with a passive interest. They are watching with a keen eye, and they're drawing lessons. Then we get into a very contentious political season, an election cycle. Once again, the enemy is learning certain things by watching us, and they're taking those lessons and incorporating them into battle plans. So I'm writing away as all this is happening, and I'm incorporating it real time into the story. So that I did not anticipate in August of 2019 when I put this outline together and started my research. But as I started writing, and then COVID hits, it became very apparent that was going to become an integral part of the story as well.
Well, when I got the advanced copy, I said to you right away the first time we talked, this is your biggest book. It feels bigger, yet it reads, I think, faster than anything you've written, faster than Terminal List. Genuinely does. I read the whole thing in one sitting, which I seem to always do with your stuff now.
Thank you.
So my review will be out by the time this interview drops. It's one of the highest scores I've ever given a thriller. And it's my pick so far. I mean, it's early into 2021, but definitely my pick for best book of the year. Yeah, man, it's tough to talk about without spoiling anything, but I will say this: it's relentless. You cannot put this one down. Fascinating stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, and this one. So I know where book 5 was going as I get to the end of this, and right now as I'm writing book 5, I know where book 6 is going. So I know book 6 beginning, middle, end, and that's something I don't have to waste bandwidth on because now I can just focus only on the story for book 5. I have the title already, so now I'm not wasting bandwidth, like worried about that as I'm going. So I like having those details set up ahead of time because then I'm not. All my effort is going into the narrative. It's not going into oh, how's this going to end? Or how am I going to start the next one based off how this ends? Like, that's not even a calculus. That's not taking up any bandwidth in my head at all. It's all focused on the story. So, so I like having that it's set up that way. That's fun for me. But thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate that. And yeah, this one was I've been thinking about these topics for years. So, and I've studied this stuff my entire life. So being able to incorporate that background into here on terrorism, learning that new stuff about infectious diseases and weaponizing infectious diseases, and what did the Japanese do in World War II, and who did they use bioweapons on? What did the Germans develop? Who did they test it on? What happened to that data after the war? How did that help start both the Soviet programs and the U.S. programs? What happened in the 70s when we signed bioweapon treaty conventions? All that sort of thing was fascinating to me because I didn't really have had a little bit of a background in it, but it was more cursory. And now it's very in depth.
Well, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on today, Jack. Everyone is going to be very excited to read this new book. And thanks for taking the time and sharing all these interesting thoughts with us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me on. It's always amazing and awesome to talk to you. And let's do it again soon.